This is Books of Titans, the podcast dedicated to the influences of influencers. The books that have helped shape prominent inventors, business leaders, athletes, intellectuals, scientists, and others. We'll talk about what makes these books such classics and at least attempt to have an intelligent discussion about what makes them so important and influential.
Hello, this is Eric Rostad coming to you right outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Today I'm going to cover a book called Building a StoryBrand by Donald Miller. This book has two subtitles. The first is Clarify Your Message so customers will listen, and the second is Use the 7 Elements of Great Storytelling to Grow Your Business. This was book 2 from my 2019 reading list of 52 total books. This episode will consist of 3 different segments. The first one, just a brief introduction to the book. The second one, 3 key takeaways. And the third segment is the one thing, the one main takeaway that I want to leave with you as the listener of this podcast. So on to segment 1. We'll start off with the author here, Donald Miller. He's written a number of books, and he's also written Blue Like Jazz, which I read in like 2003 or 2004. But what's really funny is I got this book and I didn't realize that it was the same person. So once I was looking at the jacket of the book and it mentioned him and it mentioned that he had also written Blue Like Jazz, I was kind of taken aback because it was fun. I mean, I liked that book. It was a book about faith, and I read it right after I'd graduated from college. And so to read from the same author in kind of a different style book was really cool. And especially since I didn't know that it was the same person going into it. So I want to highlight something quickly about the author, and that is just directly from his introduction to the book here on page 4, and kind of how being an author led to this book, Building a StoryBrand. So I'm going to start off with a quote here. Before I started StoryBrand, I was a writer and spent thousands of hours staring at a blank computer screen, wondering what to say. That soul-wrenching frustration led me to create a communication framework based on the proven power of story, and I swear it was like discovering a secret formula. The writing got easier, and I sold millions of books. After using that framework to create clear messages in my books, I used it to filter the marketing collateral in my own small company. Once we got clear, we doubled in revenue for 4 consecutive years. I now teach that framework to more than 3,000 businesses each year. End quote. And that's really where this book comes from and what he learned along the way. Donald Miller also lives right here in Nashville. So I live in the same city as him. I hope to run into him someday. I have read a few books now for this Books of Titans project where the authors live right here in Nashville. And I one of the authors, Jeff Goins, I've actually seen him in a couple different places now. And so you never know who you're going to see around here in Nashville. But it is really cool that there's a number of different authors in the area. So I like that as being a avid reader and hope to meet some of these authors in the coming years. This book was written in 2017, so it's fairly new, and it was suggested to me by J.P. Tanner, who also recommended last week's book. If you listened to that episode, that book was How to Lead When You're Not in Charge, and then this book also was suggested by J.P. JP is a friend of mine. We've started meeting every couple of weeks. We get together before the sun rises and drink some coffee and talk about life and books. And he works at Ramsey Solutions, which is Dave Ramsey's company. And Donald Miller is closely associated with that company and I think has helped them quite a bit in how they communicate the brand. And so I'll actually talk about one particular example later in this episode, but that's how JP had heard about the book. He said, building a story brand and Start With Why were 2 books that were percolating around the office, and since I liked Start With Why so much, I thought I would give this one a try as well. And I'm really glad I did. I read this book January 1st through the 4th of this year, so relatively quick read but very impactful. So my initial reaction is that I misread the title of this book. I thought this was I thought this was going to be a book that was going to teach me how to tell my brand's story. So me personally, I have a website development company, and so I picked up this book really in I guess the hope that it would help me tell more about my company and tell how awesome the company is. But that's not what this book's about at all. And see how I misread the title there? I thought it was going to help me with my brand's story, but the title of the book is Building a Story Brand. And it's a really important distinction on how the order of those words, because this book actually teaches you how to build a story brand. So a brand that helps your customer join into a story, not for you to share how awesome you are in your story. So this book actually ties in quite well with the book I covered last week of how to lead when you're not in charge. And because in that book, he talked about leadership being about influence and influence being about serving those around you. That's what building a story brand is about. It's about inviting your customer into a story where you are their guide. You're not the hero. You're not Superman in this story. Your customer is the hero. You are the guide. You are there to serve that customer. And again, slight distinction, but very important distinction. And we'll see how that plays out later in this episode. And to that, I would just say, if you think this is obvious, if you think that, well, of course a company is about the customer, or of course they're not thinking about themselves. If you think this is obvious, push pause on this episode and just open up the browser. Maybe you do it on your phone, do it on a computer. Just pull up 5 random websites and go to their about page and see if their about page is all about how awesome they are and how awesome their company is, or if it's a page that's built around their customer. And I guarantee you that 90% of what you are looking at out there is all about the company and how awesome they are. The structure of this book, here's how it's set up. It's 3 different sections. The first section is it's titled Why Most Marketing is a Money Pit. Section 2, building your story brand. And then section 3, implementing your story brand script. So it's really a guidebook. It first identifies the problem that most companies have in talking about their company. And then it helps you figure out your story for your company. And then last, how to implement that on your website and marketing collateral, and how you communicate that story, and how you get the customer to be the main hero of that story. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome, and thanks for checking it out. I started the Books of Titans project because I needed help picking out the best books. I found out what some of the world's top performers were reading and started reading those books to the tune of 52 per year, or roughly 1 a week. I set my reading list a year in advance, and then I share it online. That creates accountability and a connection with others who are reading those same books. I want you to experience the benefit of having a yearly reading list. To that end, the Books of Titans website is stock full of resources to help you find the best books. I've also opened up the website to where you can begin to share your reading list. This will allow you to share it with others, write reviews, and rate each book. I have 3 different plans, with the first one starting at just $9 per month. Your books will be placed in a visually stunning format that you can easily share on social platforms to show everyone what you've read, what's coming up, or just to show them your entire list for the year. Go to booksoftitans.com/mybooks for more details. In each episode, I also like to highlight a tool that can help you read better. And this week, I'm highlighting a website called the CEO Library. I've been following these guys for quite a while now, and it's 2 people in Romania who just put out excellent content. They are reading great books. They're interviewing people about their reading habits. They're finding out what top performers are reading, and then they'll highlight those reading lists. And what I'd like to encourage you to do is to sign up for their newsletter. This is not a paid advertisement, and in fact, they don't even know I'm talking about them in this episode, but I love their newsletter. It comes out once a week, and I wish that I had read or that I had written their newsletters, because it's such excellent content, and a lot of times it's similar things to what I've been thinking about, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So just go to the ceolibrary.com and be sure to sign up for their newsletter. I will also highlight this in the show notes. So back to the book. I want to highlight 3 different things that really stuck out to me while reading this book. And the first is just the overall premise. And to talk about this, I need to take a step back just for a minute. And I'm also going to tie in another book that I read this year as part of my 2019 reading list. And that book is The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. I've hesitated doing an episode on The Hero with 1,000 Faces because, frankly, I only understood about 2%. About 98% of it just blew right over my head. So I either need to read it again or discuss it with someone who is much smarter than I am to really dig deep into that book. But I think I got kind of the main gist of the book, and it is this: that there are many stories and myths that follow a general narrative. Joseph Campbell calls this the monomyth, or the hero's journey. And in the book, Campbell covers myths and stories from a variety of times, cultures, places that all have a similar arc to the story. They all have similar components. So back to our book here, Building a Story Brand, Donald Miller is tapping into this. He's tapping into the fact that there are a limited number of storylines that most myths, most books, most novels, most movies all fit within. And I remember the first time I heard this. It wasn't in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, but in a way, it's kind of like a myth busting or a buzzkill in a way. I guess you kind of hope that there's an endless number of possible stories out there. And there are, but they usually all fit within this certain framework. And if Hollywood tries to go out of that framework, for instance, those movies usually don't make it. So it's an interesting concept, and it's one I remember coming across that really had a deep impact on me. And it was in a book that I read in 1998. And that book eventually led to pretty much everything I've read since then. And it's a book I'm going to revisit next year, and I will highlight it on the podcast next year. I'm hoping to get the author on as well. I'm not going to tell you what book it is right now, but it is what I call my hinge book. It's the book that all my other books hinge upon. And if you talk to a lot of different authors or people who read a lot, they usually they usually know what their hinge book is. And so I like asking people that. So little kind of a side note there, but I say that to say that when I came across that concept that there were kind of arcs in a general narrative, that actually made me want to read more books and to find that commonality in those books. And so this stuff is powerful. Like this concept and this idea that there are similar components to stories is a very powerful concept. What Donald Miller does in this book is he identifies 7 elements of great storytelling, and then he walks you through how to use those seven elements in presenting your company. And he says if you're worried about it appearing to be formulaic, he said, once you get good at using this framework, hardly anyone even knows that you're using it. So I want to highlight this framework really quickly, and I'm not going to get into too many other things in the book because I want you to read the book, and I don't want to give away too much, but you can find the 7 basic elements here anywhere on the internet. So I don't feel like I'm giving away too much here. I'm going to state it in a sentence, and here are the 7 elements. A character has a problem and meets a guide who gives them a plan and calls them to action that helps them avoid failure and end in success. So that right there, those are the 7 elements of great storytelling. On to my second key takeaway here. And this is I'm presenting it as a question. Why a story? Why do we need to communicate in a story? Or why is Donald Miller encouraging us to do this? I'm going to read from page 6 here, and I quote, "Story formulas put everything in order so the brain doesn't have to work to understand what's going on." If we go back to Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, he talks about this, and he talks about our methods of thinking as we have a system 1 thinking and system 2. System 1 I think of as the unconscious. It's the things you're not really thinking about when you come across something, whether it's a person, a book, or an idea. It's our initial reaction, and it's usually not conscious. We're not usually conscious. It's tapping into things that are already in our brain. Whereas system 2 is where we're taking a step back, thinking things through a little bit, and that takes more time, and it's not immediate. But with story, with marketing material, with people coming coming to your company for the first time, if it's not clear what it is that you do or what you're trying to communicate, they're going to have to tap into that system 2. And tapping into system 2 requires work. It requires energy. Your brain has to work. So you have to actually burn calories to think of what it is you're trying to communicate. Whereas story kind of taps into that system 1. Story formulas, to quote again, put everything in order so the brain doesn't have to work to understand what's going on. That's why it's important to be able to communicate in story. Here's another quote from the book. "Story is the greatest weapon we have to combat noise because it organizes information in such a way that people are compelled to listen." And that goes right into my third key takeaway of noise. Here's a quote from page 12. "Business is a fierce, insidious enemy that, if not identified and combated, will contort our company into an unrecognizable mess. The enemy I'm talking about is noise. Noise has killed more ideas, products, and services than taxes, recessions, lawsuits, climbing interest rates, and even inferior product design. I'm not talking about the noise inside our business. I'm talking about the noise we create as a business. What we often call marketing is really just clutter and confusion sprayed all over our websites, emails, and commercials, and it's costing us millions." He then relates noise to music, and this was awesome. "Music, however, is noise that has been submitted to certain rules that allow the brain to engage it on a different level. Story is similar to music. A good story takes a series of random events and distills them into the essence of what really matters." And isn't that what we really need? What most of us really need? If you're like me, I get so confused on how to communicate what it is that I do, how I can help my clients. There's so many different things I want to highlight, but a lot of that is noise. And what this book does is help you to wade through that noise, get to the basic elements that fit within a storyline that can be easily communicated. That's the power of this book. Now on to segment 3, and the one key takeaway from this book, the one thing I always hope to remember, and it is this, that brands that position themselves as heroes unknowingly compete with potential customers. Brands that position themselves as heroes unknowingly compete with potential customers. Your brand is not the hero. Your company is not the hero. You are not the hero. You are the guide. You are there to guide your customer. You are there to serve your customer. This is a really important thing to grasp. And if you look at most websites out there, if you look at how most people communicate what it is their company does, it is that they are presenting themselves as the hero. We have this many years of experience. We've won this many cases. We have helped this many clients. but they don't present it in a way where those clients are the heroes. They present it in a way that they are the hero. And what Donald Miller says here is that is not the way to communicate what it is your brand does, and that's not the way to position yourselves. I came across this in a really interesting way I was looking at Chris Hogan's website, and Chris Hogan is on the Dave Ramsey team. And I was looking all over his website for an about page. I've created hundreds of websites, and if there is one thing I see on every website, it is this, that after the homepage, the second most visited page on any website is the about page. And I always tell my clients, everyone wants to know who it is that they're doing business with. They want to know about you, about your past. But here's Chris Hogan's website, and there is not an about page to be found. And so it just made me think about it. Why was Hogan foregoing this? Why did he not have information about himself? What was he thinking? Was this a mistake? But after reading this book, I see what's behind that. He doesn't want the site to be about him. He wants it to be about his customers. So if you go to that site, you'll see testimonials. You'll see people who have read his book and what they've gotten out of the book, but then how that has impacted their life. So you're seeing them, you're seeing the client as the hero. You're not seeing Chris Hogan as the hero. Chris is still all over the website. You can see his picture, you can see what it is he does, but it's that shift in communicating that it is all about his clients. It is not about him. And it's a really interesting thing, and it really hits on something that I've always thought and I've always communicated to my clients on the importance of sharing about your company and how awesome you are and how great you are. But here's a quote towards the end of the book. "We found time and time again that leaders desire to be seen as heroes when, in actuality, everything they think they want from playing the hero only comes by playing the guide. Guides are respected, loved, listened to, understood, and followed loyally." So here's a challenge. I challenge you to read this book. I think you'll enjoy it, and I think it'll be very helpful for how you communicate what it is that you do. And that could be whether you have your own company or whether you work within a company. It could help you position yourself within that company, or even help the marketing group communicate the company to potential clients and existing clients as well. So to recap the book, you know it's a good book when you want to immediately go back through the book and apply what you've learned to your own company or to whatever it is you do. And that's what this book did. I mean, when I finished it, I actually went through it and in a notebook put how I could implement some of these ideas into my company. And I want to keep doing that. I kind of think that this will be a book that will come off the bookshelf quite often to help me think through how it is I communicate and how I communicate on my website. It's a very practical book. A lot of ideas on things to do on your website. I mean, including calls to action, how to communicate those, emails, what to do, what not to do in email communication. So the beginning, a very, very broad kind of overview of why this is important, the different parts of the story, but then really into the nitty gritty of how you can integrate this immediately into your company. Not only that, the author, Donald Miller, has also provided a website link where you can create your own company brand script. So you can put in the different parts of that storyline that I highlighted, where there's a character has a problem, meets a guide who gives them a plan, calls them to action, helps them avoid failure, and ends in a success. There's a free website tool where you can put in the different pieces of that and then kind of help tie it together in a communication method that you can then use on your website and in your marketing copy. So very helpful book, and then a lot of tools that Donald Miller has, including a podcast, a class you can actually come to in Nashville that's over 48 hours, a website full of people who have gone through his training that can help you communicate your story brand as well. So That's going to do it for this episode. Before I sign off, just a reminder that you can now share your own reading list on the Books of Titans website by going to booksoftitans.com/mybooks. You can also follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter at Books of Titans. And if you haven't already done so, you can subscribe to this podcast and find all of our past episodes through iTunes, the Android Marketplace, or your podcast manager of choice. If you're enjoying the podcast, please make sure to give it a 5-star rating in iTunes and share your favorite episodes on social media. We'll be back next week with another book. And until then, keep reading, keep learning, keep listening. I'm out.